See if we pop up on here.
Hey everybody, it's good to see you guys. We are jumping into our next section here on the Infinite Quest. We're looking at 3 attributes tonight, right? So we're going to be looking at beauty, glory,
and creativity.
Creativity, kind of one that's not usually found in the theology books, actually. So kind of interesting. So how are you guys doing? Anything in the women's ministry you want to let the ladies know about, or anything? Just throwing you on the spot, babe, for fun.
Yeah. I've never been good at that. But yes, so on October 1st, we're going to be doing what we're calling engraved gatherings. So there's going to be more information about that. Absolutely. And we're starting a new study October 7th.
And then, Stephen, we got this thing with Care Portal next.
Yeah.
On September
6th. Not this Sunday, but next Sunday we're having a launch celebration. And so we're having people, some businesses might from the community show up just that want to support, they're asking for donations or have given us donations.
If they want to look at Care Portal, what's the website again?
Careportal.org, I think, is the website. And it's good for all churches, not just ours. You can all get plugged in to whatever it is.
Share it with whatever church you're a part of. It's a great thing to get connected with.
Yeah.
And then we're seeing we're going through our spiritual growth campaign at the church. So hopefully if you enjoy some of these and you're in a small group, when you get done, maybe you can go back and review some of these with your small group. But again, if you have questions, you can shoot them to us. We're hoping it works this time. Last time it didn't work.
Oh, the live chat?
The live chat, and we would love to connect with you guys. However, if you have a question, and it's a different kind of question, we always have available for whatever question, theological or just interested in seeing how we would respond, is at questions@obcc.church. Questions@obcc.church. We just would love to hear from you guys, even to let us know that you watch. We would love to begin to connect with you guys as we consider where we're going next, because we're going to talk about the Trinity, and then I think we'll be wrapping it up after that. But just looking at a whole bunch of different places, and some of you have wondered, we did the conversation on race, like, I don't know, 7 weeks or so ago, and we've been kind of hunting around to have a conversation also with some police officers or some various, definitely sheriffs, police officers, that kind of law enforcement. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And it's been one of those hard things to find people who are going to sit and have those conversations theologically with us.
Not to mention they have to get approval from their commanders and different things. Yeah. And so we are desperately trying to look for a panel for that. We haven't ignored that crowd. For those of you who don't know, our church for the last 2 years attends the Corona clergy church meetings that we meet regularly with the police department to keep in good relationships. During COVID, some of that's been more difficult because at first we couldn't, so we're getting plugged back in and energized as we go. But we've always tried to be a part of that community, and they've always been real supportive. So even the day we went down there, we supported the police officers as well as the people that were there protesting.
Yeah. So just letting you guys know we're still trying to look for that and just keep you updated. But now we're going to shift gears and we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about the first subject, which is
also, there's a question I want. If you know a Christian organization, because it has been difficult, that supports law enforcement somehow, that they're a Christian charity organization, I would like to know about that.
Yes.
You can email me at soldham@olive-branch.org. I'm looking for a good charity that supports the law enforcement community from a Christian perspective. But I'll take some of the wounded warrior type stuff that's out there too. But I'm really looking more for a Christian organization that we could really get behind. So if you know that, send it to me. I'd love to know how to support that community even more.
I'm remembering before we jump into that, there was a question last week that we didn't get to address.
Yeah, about time.
Yeah, on time.
We didn't have time to get to time, or
it didn't work, so we didn't get a chance.
Yeah.
So the question was by Roger, and he was just asking, isn't time associated with space and mass and speed of light and all that stuff?
All the physics.
Yes, everything so far in our physics that we understand is this space-time continuum. The time and space and mass are integrated. I've always thought it was interesting when you think about that. What does God see as, one person moving, two twins? You always got that thing where there's a twin on the planet, and then there's a twin in a spaceship, and that one twin's living on the planet while the other one's going at the speed of light. And when he gets back, He's still the twin on the spaceship is young, and this twin
like
on the
80
planet
or
is old.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Was it like Cosmos?
Yeah, and so the question is, if you were watching that from the outside, what would that look like? Like if God's standing there watching the little guy go all the way out there and then go all the way back, that's God's outside of time like that. Like it's not relative to him. Time
it's relevant to us.
Yeah, it's relative to us. We're in it. It commands us. He's outside of it. It doesn't command him. So again, getting back to the fact that really in our attributes of God, which is really important when we hit beauty here in a second, they don't exist outside of him and constrain God. They are in actually who God is, or they're in what he has created. And so, two very different things. And beauty is one of those things that honestly gets really difficult. Even the definitions of beauty at least I was reading out there, all of them were based on the human perspectives, in the sense of like it's the
your subjective experience of it.
It's the sum quality of all things that make you
pleasurable.
Yeah,
Did you
enjoy it.
Did you enjoy it? Yeah.
So that's not how that works, at least from what I'm understanding, because I can't define God's attributes from
the way we enjoy it.
we focus on, because that falls into that trap, right?
Yeah.
The beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Wouldn't you think that's what most people think?
Yeah, I think most people think that beauty is different for everyone, and everyone has a different perspective on what beauty is, and that we can't ever make any kind of objective control over what's good as far as art, because it's all about the person, and everybody's different. So there's been a real push lately in our culture to get rid of any kind of objectivity that has to do with the phrase beauty. In fact, they're trying to make everything is beautiful in its own way, and everything is...
Well, what do you mean by that? Like...
There was just a video. There's an ad for TikTok. Did you see the TikTok ad?
Mm-mm.
We were watching, I don't know what we were watching, but the whole thing was, I think you're beautiful even with your crazy hair. And it was showing lots of different people. And then they threw in some like transgender, so boys dressing up like girls.
Oh, yeah.
But it was just kind of like this idea that, like there's beauty in all of these things, which in some ways I actually agree with them, like not necessarily in what they were saying, but I find
there's
it
beauty in
interesting how
different
they're
kinds
trying
of people, right? But there is, as we'll find out, there is a moral component to beauty.
Yes.
Because when we talk about God and his attribute of beauty, the way that I attacked it anyways was really to try to say that it's his innate delightfulness of who he is in his perfections. And so you cannot escape that beauty and God's moral perfections, they go together. Like it's impossible. You cannot say that is beautiful and it be very, in the sense of like true beauty, cannot be morally ugly. And that may be a statement, but I do think that you cannot say that it's truly beautiful in the sense of like if it's a morally ugly thing. It's sort of like there's an aspect that can be beautiful, and I think that's what you're trying to say, but the morality aspect is sullying the beauty. It keeps
So you're saying that it like morality constrains beauty?
I think they go hand in hand. I think that which said at the end, that which is beautiful is that which is moral is beautiful. Like moral, when somebody, when you see a human being do something moral, to the point where it's superiorly moral. Whether it's Gandhi fighting for...
Hacksaw.
Yeah, Hacksaw, a horrible situation, but this guy is just saving person after person after person. There is a beauty of his character that transcends the ugliness of the situation. And I think that's a great example because of that. And so there is a deep-seated concern in the scriptures that morality and beauty they coalesce. That's otherwise we will call things that are profane beautiful, and those things aren't.
Which is what our culture is doing.
Right, it is. It's in fact when we talk a little bit about creativity and art, we'll get into that. Profanity has become our concept of art, which is absolutely weird to me as a Christian. But when we come to God's beauty, I don't know. Have you guys ever do you guys ever think of God as beautiful in your own lives, like as you guys have studied the Bible, or if you know, in your experience of God, would you have ever sat back and go, God, you are so beautiful? I mean, is that something that you would have thought of?
I think it's hard because when we use the word beautiful, it typically is masculine and feminine kind of views of beauty. So do you think of God as effeminately beautiful, I guess, is what is the misconception.
And so like sexually, is that like...
Well, just aesthetically, I think boys, they say are handsome and girls are beautiful. They don't call God, if you think of God as God the Father, you don't think, oh, Jesus is pretty. That's the thing that goes through your mind, even though you are talking about beauty. But you're talking about something a little higher than that when you're talking about the orderly nature of God's being. Well, that draws you close to Him.
So you'd say God's attractive.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't feel that way because I'm fine using the word beauty, but I know I've had this conversation with other men and they can't get past the phrase beauty when I'm talking about God. I have no problem saying God is beautiful. Yeah, but they associate it with femininity or associate it with sexuality in some way, and appropriately so, which is why it's hard for some people to worship in certain songs if all of them talk about God's beauty and they don't make it more colorful in the way they express it.
Which is funny to me because it is David, warrior poet, who's the one who writes, the one thing I ask of the Lord that I would seek after, that I might dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of Yahweh, to inquire in His temple. And there's this like sense of, I just want to sit and gaze upon, and I think that's where, okay, so there's...
And we sexualize that. I know I've heard people, modern clergy people who are pro-LGBT, sexualize David on verses like this.
That's weird because I think of beauty, then it's like, there have been times in our worship where I just think it's beautiful in the room. Like maybe Brian, our tech guy, has taken a panoramic photo of the room with all the lights on and the worship going. And even with the smoke machines moving, because it shows the beams of light and all that stuff. And it is just beautiful. Now, that is a representation of, man, if you're in the temple and the Shekinah glory of God is there, you're going to be like, this is beautiful. God, you are beautiful. We forget He's light, and we love the beauty of light. We think of light as, kind of alluring. Like, that's why you look at fire. It's light. You're like, radiation, so pretty. It's kind of so funny.
Yeah, I think that, personally, growing up, I think that I've always found God's nature to be something that I'm super drawn to, and it's beautiful. I think that I would say that from a young age. Worship experiences, encountering God's people that are, portraying His character is something that's beautiful, that is moving to me. I feel very moved by that. I think so. I don't know that I associate beauty with a feminine attribute. I don't think I associate beauty with because I also think of beautiful as when we go to Yosemite or the Grand Canyon. There's so much so I think of beauty externally in the world.
But you would admit
reflects God's nature.
Of the human beings who image God, women are usually, we would say, the ones that would reflect the attribute of beauty more than, say, there are some beautiful men, right? But men have a tendency to be more of the reflective of of power or of
the grandeur and the awe.
I think because I associate it with
you would use these words.
Nature. I associate beauty with nature, and nature isn't necessarily feminine to me. So
True.
That's why I'm saying.
That's good.
When I'm in nature. I'm sure people do that, but for me personally, I think of it as a little bit more true beauty is this deep, awe-inspiring thing. So it's not necessarily feminine.
I just want people to be aware of when we have a conversation about beauty and God, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think you can see the influence of the world tainting your view of the ability to have a true aesthetic experience of something that's beautiful without sexualizing it or feminizing it in some negative way.
So aesthetic, what's that word?
The way you appreciate something.
Sure.
That's the easy way of saying it.
The big term of aesthetics is the study of beauty.
The study of, why people are attracted to things, why they draw.
Why are they delighting in that?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because we as Christians, here we are, we're going to get a chance to talk about things that are beautiful, things that are lovely. And again, we get to that, I think, that excellent definition that we get from Paul, where he's like, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, lovely, commendable, excellent. This is all a definition of beauty in that sense.
The good things.
Yeah, of the good things. But what again, this is coming from some of your studies by a guy named Mortimer J. Adler, right? And an excellent philosopher. Actually went from, did he go from atheism into Catholicism? Is that what
I don't know. Yeah, he went into Catholicism from a philosophical point of view. But yeah, he's highly influential to a lot of people or kind of thinkers.
The point is for Paul is that he tells us we need to think about these things. This is something that there's a training process because something with the way, so getting back to...
There's a discipline.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Like there are people that would probably see God and be like, I don't get it. What's so cool?
Well, I mean, if anybody that's in heaven, right, is like there because they want to be with God.
Right.
And so there are going to be people that are appalled by God's nature. They're not drawn to him.
Yeah, isn't that? But I was always told, if they just saw God, they would repent and they'd fall. But that's not true.
They'd fear him and be in awe.
But
maybe
not drawn.
But not drawn. Well, not drawn.
Well, yeah, because the devil.
The devil, and he's beautiful. He's actually called an angel of light. This concept of great.
So now, how does
divinity.
that work when morality and beauty are connected, and yet his character is obviously wanting?
Well, there's deception, and he's a liar, right? So there's
also
So it's more of like the external beauty that
God endowed. This is the thing. Like part of beauty is a gift. And when you're talking about external beauty specifically, God bestows it as He's graciously gives it out. What we do with it is completely different than the character. That's why God says, I look past just the external. But I do think God created the external. So not looking at it being a reality is weird. When someone says, well, I don't look at people, I just look at their hearts. I'm like, that's weird. I see who they are, aesthetically appealing, but that's not the only thing I should focus on. And that's
so
not
hard for us as humans to hold on to two things at the same time. Like,
it
there is
because of our sin nature.
Beauty, and yet it's not.
It's when
the extent of it. Like,
but
you can't
this thing is there's this weird reality, and this happens especially with with feminine beauty. There's been a lot of words obviously created around beauty, and that there's been shown like there's these women that have been so vain and so willing, but they lose that beauty. It becomes vanity because it's passing. It's just fleeting. So vanity is over a focus on that which is. It's a worship of the wrong beauty. You're supposed to be able to worship true beauty that will never fade. And that's why moral beauty is more powerful than physical beauty. And the idea that our moral beauty will never fade. It'll never go. God's beauty never fades. He's worthy of worship. But when we are so focused on how muscular or how beautiful we are, whatever, or how proportioned, that'll go away. Give it enough age, give it enough time, I don't care how much plastic surgery you have, you wind up becoming, you're going to lose that beauty, Scripture says. In some cases, some people get so fixated on it, they become like hag-like. Their internal morality eventually shows up in their body.
I was thinking about
Dorian Gray.
Yeah, that's what
great.
That book is very interesting.
That's a picture of vanity.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's an aspect of beauty. External beauty is often bestowed as a gift, and we think of it as external beauty as looks, but it also has to do with charm, or even things like intellect. Anything that draws people to you, that makes you attractive by other people, can be considered a gift oftentimes. So how smart someone is, you can always work on it, and usually it's okay to work on it. It's just who you work on it for. But if you see it as a gift, I think it gives you in the right mindset, because it makes you look internally at yourself. And I don't think our world does that. I think our world sees external beauty and wants to have that thing represent itself. They want to occupy it in a way that it's not designed to. Like, I notice someone's aesthetically beautiful, it shouldn't go farther than that. Then I want that, it should be mine, it should represent me, which is really taking it farther than that.
So now in your study that you did, you said that we're going to punt the idea. Like, you're gonna kick away the idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, but we can talk about that here.
Let me get that.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that because I think that it's interesting to distinguish, because there's an aspect of beauty that is in the eye of the beholder. So where's that distinction that the ultimate true beauty isn't in the eye of the beholder?
So, okay, I think that's why I was bringing up that Philippians 4:8 passage, because he says we need to think about these things, which implies that you're not naturally pondering that which is good and honorable and lovely and commendable.
That's why the news is all bad.
And that's why you watch art
stuff.
after Christianity kind of lets go of art and it puts it in this idea of it's the eye of the beholder. All it's done is denigrated itself. It's degraded down and down and down to the point where today most of the things that we that is celebrated in the high art world is actually just profanities.
It's kitsch to try and get your attention.
Yeah, it's
all I'm left with if I have no aesthetic. I just need to shock you.
And so a guy taping a banana to a wall becomes high art, and then some guy walking up and eating it, it's like this is performance art, and you're just like, there's no definition here.
So, like I said,
anymore.
What is the distinction between subjective beauty and objective beauty?
Okay, so philosophically speaking, subjective beauty is my experience of beauty, your experience of beauty, Stephen, or your experience of beauty. Objective beauty is that which is innately beautiful
to the
and
object.
Therefore would reflect that which God is innately in his beauty. So it's his innate perfections that are in that. So now,
when you think about like an innately beautiful thing, so like you think about nature, because I like nature.
Yosemite,
so like Yosemite's innately. I mean, it
beautiful.
is like when you go through Yosemite, it's like screaming at you of its beauty and grandeur. And in my personal opinion, I believe that there's something that it's like calling itself to worship God. And that's my experience when I've been there. Like it literally was like a spiritual experience. And I don't mean that in a weird way. I just mean
it was like walking into a cathedral.
Yeah, I was just like so in awe of who our God is and his ability to create. Now, when we were horseback riding in the Hollywood Hills, I met a man. Do you remember what country he was from? He was from the Netherlands.
Yeah.
But he
which would be Holland.
He personally didn't believe that Yosemite was that great.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, like, is that because there was a subjective aspect to experiencing it, or is it a lack in him that's able to see the objective beauty there?
Yeah, so I would say that biblically speaking, there is a reality in that our fallen minds are not tuned any longer to true beauty. It's tuned to selfish beauty. It's tuned to the beauty of
avarice,
desire, of sinful. There's a sinful twist to it, and so we train our brains to respond. That beauty portion of our brain responds to things. So, like pornography trains men's minds or women's minds, depending on what it is, to think of something as enjoyable or to gain beauty out of it. Where actually it's not beautiful. It's profane. It's ugly. It's ugly what it's doing to people. It's ugly in what it's portraying.
It's out of order.
It's voyeurism. There's all this stuff that is out of order in this, but the brain can get fixated on thinking it's that way. Now, I used this illustration, and I think it's weird, but it helped me, and that was that my brother-in-law used to not like golf. Thought golf was, lame.
It's not a real sport.
It's not real. Yeah,
that's what I grew up hearing.
But once you start,
I'm not a fan.
Once you've played it enough times, and you're like, you've tried to make that ball do certain things. You sit down, and you watch a professional golfer, and there is almost a magic about what they're doing. And so your mind is tuned differently. Same thing with like classical music, right? A lot of people are like, classical music is so boring until you know what's going on classically, like what's the movement and what's the theme that starts it, and how is that theme going to move through the next two movements, and what are the movements, because they're actually defined on it. And once you learn these things, your mind is tuned to begin to appreciate the beauty of it. And that's where that Adler stuff comes in, because you were talking about the difference of
matters of taste versus matters of truth.
Right. And what did he say? You want to get to a place of appreciation?
Well, there's two kinds. There's something you have to know. As Christians, we still have a sin nature as people. So there's going to be a part of us enjoying a thing that we may never really fully enjoy properly until we get to heaven because of our fallen state. So that's something to keep in mind, because there are things that may not be in our practice that are really good for you. And for me, I equate it to eating. you have a taste buds and you have certain things, but there are certain things you should eat that bring about a certain amount of healthiness to the way you eat. That actually, after I lost a lot of the weight, I was in tune to things that were more healthier, and I never thought I would have changed that dramatically in what I ate because I was eating more in balance. Now there was some things where I just don't like that, and I do like this, that are okay, and I find that to be very similar. There's an objectivity to what we consume and why we consume it that I think is more moral than we think it is. There are some things I think God just gifts us in when we remove sin from the equation and we just like something more than someone else. Then I think that's perfectly acceptable. So we take music, for instance. There are people who should, in my view, according to just being how God designed us, we should have a really strong relationship with music in some sense. If God created it, he wants us to worship him with it, we should learn about that art to a certain degree so that we can glorify God in that area. I think everybody's called to that in some sense, and to the same degree. But then there are these individuals who I think God gifts to have an overabundant enjoyment of something, and that's fine. I'm never going to have the same aesthetic enjoyment as that person, perhaps in this lifetime, and I don't know what heaven will be like in that regard. But for now, God, whatever, gives someone more of a pleasure. That's after removing sin. But I do think there are certain things that are objectively necessary that we are to grow in as human beings in all aspects of God's creation, that we need to find the beauty in them, and we need to look at them the way God designed them, and we need to find out to a certain degree whether that's good. The big enemy of that is the utilityness of things and the pragmatism that we have in our culture that doesn't allow us to savor something or take the time that we have no use for in my 5 minutes now. Because it might be hard to sit and take the time and watch Yosemite and go, why do some people find this beautiful or whatever? And you may not ever have the same degree that you might have, but to me you have to have some degree of awe when you look at God's creation. Because if God created it, it's orderly in a certain sense. There's aesthetic beauty, and it's a representation of the future heaven. You look at the scriptures that talk about God, creation, nature. To that extent, which scripture wants you to understand the fullness of what nature has been in God's design is important for all people.
Well, so what you're saying is that there's this like sense as a Christian, spiritually speaking, that we are called to be moved by the beauty that God has created in all aspects of life.
But because of sin,
we're
dulled
limited in that. And like in some
appetite.
sense, our appetite is. You said dulled. I was thinking numb.
Yeah.
To like almost the experience of, and it's not intended for us to have pleasure in something in and of itself. It's to call us to God. Like it's to call us to worship God. Like even in cooking meat, like some people are amazing at cooking.
So let's just say that I think that when you get into salvation, when you get into heaven, there's going to be a baseline of joy that is going to be found in the beautiful things. So let's just think like all that'll be gone. You'll walk into Yosemite and be like, "This is gorgeous," but a geologist is going to walk into Yosemite and still in heaven, if they're in the new Yosemite, if it's there, right, is going to walk in and go, "This is even." He's not only going to be impressed. He's going to understand and be even more impressed. We have a gut reaction. I think our gut reaction will be transferred. But I think the thing is that, Stephen, you're challenging us to, and I like this, because because you think about it, we're separated from God. Let's put it this way. We've been separated from true beauty. We have fallen away from true beauty. And therefore, we take delight in sin.
Yeah, we do.
We take delight.
Well, at least I do.
I know it's. And my point is that as Christians, when you're saved, do not think that somehow you can be passive in your engagement with beauty. We have to be active in our engagement with beauty. It is the reordering of our mind as we get to know who God is and we get to know who His creation is. That will reorder us to true beauty. I think that's what's made me more interested. I mean, I grew up enjoying all kinds of music, but it's made me more interested in other cultures' music.
Yeah.
Other cultures.
Oh, yeah. We took that missiology class on just other cultures, how they worship. Whether you like the aesthetic nature of the sound of the music, the way that they go about trying to figure out how to worship God from a different culture is fascinating.
Yeah.
How the Spirit works with a different group of people.
Or I would never eat that. And yet then as a Christian, I'm like, but what do they find aesthetically beautiful about? Is this fallen? You're not supposed to eat bugs, but then you've got, because then there's lines of profanity and there's lines of evil, and you have to discern those things, because the gospel again comes in and redeems culture, it redeems beauty, and so there is this very real sense that once we've been transformed, we're drawn near to beauty.
I feel like as a Christian, kind of what I'm hearing from the conversation is, in one sense, you have to be intentional about enjoying beauty and pursuing it in sense of like worshiping God in that, right? To see God's nature and his gloriousness and all the different aspects of creation. But then at the same time, also being attuned to what things am I delighting in that I shouldn't be? Like that are kind of low, like they're not intended to be.
These aren't conscious thoughts, in my opinion. They're draws. Like you when you see something, you go, oh, and you just move towards it. And you have to train yourself as a Christian to not do what I don't. That's one of the benefits of being a Christian is that God in His law tells you stop desiring things that aren't good for you,
right?
Because we're just drawn to them. Just take us and
like
walk us right.
Fries.
Yeah. And well, that takes a discipline, like, and
I like the salt. That's
and to a certain measure and to a certain degree, you can enjoy some of those things, but it's just the fact that those things are made purposely in a lab to get you to eat way more than your body is intended to eat. And there's a limitation to how much you can enjoy things, and I think we hate limitations. And God says, no, you're not designed to enjoy it to that degree that it satisfies you, that you actually profane the thing. If you really want good fries, don't eat them for a long time and then eat them in measure, and then you're like, these really taste good.
Yeah,
or they
but there's
really
a
don't
difference
taste
between
good.
a good fry and something that is like been engineered to
deceive you.
To make because it's bad.
Like,
and again, I don't want to.
It is true though. People are trying.
Like, for example, the difference between a cultivated plant versus a wild plant.
Right.
I mean, I've gone out in the woods and seen wild plants, and they're ugly.
And my first thought was, we're intended to take care of nature, and I see why, because on its own it doesn't develop, it
doesn't develop in its greatest potential.
That's a good
at least in its beauty. There's a beauty to it. I'm not going to deny that a forest has beauty.
There's times where you're like, oh, this needs to be like.
Well, that was the idea behind original gardens, is they were trying to. And if you look at a lot of French art and you look at a lot of other stuff. There's like whole documentaries on the philosophy of gardens. This might not be interesting to most of you, but what they're trying to get to is that unity and balance with nature is the original intent for design. And you have that in the Garden of Eden a lot. You have God wanted man to cultivate the garden in such a fashion that brought glory to God and use the skills that he gave them to be a part of his creation, to further it along.
To further the order that he had already instilled into the creation. Because beauty and order go together. And I think that's an important aspect as well. When we talk about perfections and God's innate beauty and his beauty being the innate enjoyment of his perfections, that means it's an order. That's why oftentimes things that we consider that kind of give you that like feeling, well, sometimes it's because it's out of order. It's something that unfortunately is broken by the fall in such a manner that you look at that tree, or you look at that hand, or you look at whatever, and you're just like it's off. Now there are some things that are just made in and of themselves repulsive. God's created feces and certain. I think
but even that, I think
insects,
we get numb to it sometimes because of our.
Yeah.
Even the things that are innately repulsive.
Oh yeah, but I think, and that's very evident in the scriptures, like in certain sections of Ezekiel, because our culture has become so sexualized. You can read sections of Ezekiel where it was intended to cause you to feel repulsed by what you were reading. That it doesn't make it gives almost the opposite feeling because we're numb and then retrained. Our brains have been trained in the wrong direction towards evil.
I see the biggest, and this is one of the questions: is how is the world's view of beauty influenced the church positively and negatively? And that's really where you start to see in how it used to be a movement called Christian art, and now it's like
Rembrandt.
Yeah. Now
we talked a lot about that in like film and stuff.
Yeah, I think oftentimes people look at the inspiration that God wrote into Scripture and think that all I need to do is proclaim what God did, and I don't need to palate it at all. It'd be like cooking chicken is good for you. I'm just going to boil it and give it to you, and somehow that the chicken is so magic in and of itself that it's going to be palatable to people. And that's the problem. I think a lot of times we either take somebody else's creative time and energy and effort, they cultivate it like a garden, they grew some object, and then we just slap Jesus' name on the logo. And that's what drives me insane, is I'll see like a shirt and somebody, like I was talking about Coca-Cola brands, somebody shaped the Coca-Cola bottle, whatever you think, to make it alluring. It's the shape of a woman. That's what the Coca-Cola bottle was like. And people didn't know subconsciously why they were drawn to the bottle. But it's that shape of a woman from that time period. And some guy designed it and kept trying to make it beautiful, to make it alluring and attractive. And then he said, I'm going to sell Coke. And, whether you think that's good or not, that took a lot of talent and ability and thought processes and crafting.
Well, it took a knowledge of his philosophy of what he was intending to do with an application through the skill and the theory of what of his world. And so these things come generating into culture, which I don't want to jump into that too quick here. But
because we're going to talk about creativity. But then slapping a Coca-Cola, Jesus Christ on the side of a Coca-Cola bottle is really taking someone else's work and just attaching God's name to it and going, look, isn't that pretty?
Instead of taking the hard-earned time of thinking through God's beauty, thinking through his narrative, thinking through... So I think the greatest example to me of the proof that beauty is not just in the eye of the beholder, but its beauty is something you have to think about and train yourself, is the Bible itself. How many times do people sit down with the Bible and be boring? Well, your brain is not trained. You haven't trained yourself to find the beauty within it. And that's why, like we were joking, Tim Mackey's like, there's a verse.
I don't understand that.
Oh, that should put
I like
on
this
a cross stitch.
Yeah.
It's like... It's kind of like, not blah, 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 ooh, blah, blah, ooh. And it's like you're not picking up the blah, blahs are just as important as the ooh. And in fact, the ooh may not even be ooh when you actually get it in context.
Yeah, it's like, I remember reading Reader's Digest, and they used to have quotes from different people, and it would be like, that quote doesn't mean anything to me. That quote, oh, I like this quote. That's how people read the Bible. They just look through the things that, oh, that makes me feel good. Oh, that's cool. And then there's no context for anything. You don't jump into the difficult parts and learn what those passages mean.
You don't wrestle with the poetry and that it's poetry, because and what we forget is we're reading Hebrew poetry and we're thinking, this is so difficult.
Doesn't rhyme.
And this doesn't rhyme. And,
in Hebrew.
And that's the opposite. The point was it was supposed to evoke in you an emotion.
Yeah.
It was supposed to draw fear into your heart, which is why people who understood poetry at a certain time period prior to our generation would read these things and literally be scared. I mean, you look at the art that was produced in the Middle Ages about some of these things. There was a visceral fear that was driven into them because they were living closer to the poetry than we are. And so there's a gap that's created in our thinking, so we don't even see the beauty of the Bible anymore, to the point that modern Americans don't even put it on like the top 100 best books kind of anymore. They're like, Bible.
Because they haven't read it.
Yeah.
Well, you have to not just read it for its surface value. Oftentimes, too, what you're next to all the time, like if you say you're the guy who's sweeping up near the Mona Lisa all day long, you might not, unless you take time, unless you took that job to be close to paintings, just think, it's just a day job. I don't really care about the aesthetics of where I'm at. And I think sometimes we're surrounded by God's beauty in his word, and we don't actually take the time to deep dive and study, or we don't want someone else to help us through the difficult parts, because it is difficult to get through. Like, when was the last time you knew any group of people that sat around reading ancient literature and poetry? That's not a thing that most people do unless you're a professor, right? But the Bible says, no, I think you guys are strong enough, smart enough, and adept enough. If you want to know me, there's all this richness in here, and I'm going to put it in Hebrew, and then you're going to translate it to English, and you're still going to find what God is saying. That's how powerful our God is. But it makes you curious. It draws you in once you start realizing, oh, is that what's going on? Oh, is that what he's thinking? Oh, is that why that phrase gets repeated 3 times? Oh, I never noticed that. And then you start looking at the sophistication of God and how he crafts his books in orders like a storyteller. There's like 3 sections in Jonah, and then a middle piece, and then 3 sections in Jonah, and someone lined them up and put them next to each other, and you can see there's order and structure, and it's orderly with the entire Bible, and it fits right in the middle of the passage for a reason. And when you start seeing all these connections, and God's like, I'm drawing you closer to the Messiah. I'm drawing my people closer to the Messiah. And he's coming closer and closer to the arrival of Christ, that when he comes, it's just like, wow, okay, this is a mystery that's been revealed. And you don't get that mystery because we kind of go, yeah, it's a mystery. And then, it's something we didn't know, and now we know. Because we're not really looking at the art and the poetry of it,
right? And
just how hard it was for people to see and live through those experiences and what they went through.
So then, glory is different. Like, we think of beauty, God's glory, Shekinah glory, these kind of things mix in. And so when we talk about God's glory, we're talking about just his character as it's revealed to us. So when you're in Yosemite and you see it, beauty and glory go together. I mean, you can't ignore that God's revelation of himself isn't beautiful. Like, the stars, but then all the other ones, like his majesty is there, his awe,
the grandeur,
the grandeur, the power, all these things are there. So when we talk about glory, we're talking about all of that together, and which leads us to, and I'm just going to kind of quickly move through glory, since glory is kind of a broad catch-all for all of God's
we need to talk about
attributes.
holiness, and it's very similar.
Yeah, and so you can go back to the holiness one and check that out. But it's this broad category of these things all drawn together as God reveals it. And so when you get God's revelation of his glory, he's done it through creation, which leads us back to his creativity, and that God is supremely creative. I mean, we keep finding, like, the more scientific examining we do of insects, the more we're finding the craziest designs that nobody ever thought of. Like, you're just like, this is incredible.
Yeah, we've designed aircraft around certain bugs, the way they fly and things. We figure out that we still don't understand why certain birds fly.
There's this, they discovered how shark skin makes them slick through the water. They use that technology and produce swim suits. They had to ban them from the Olympics because it was increasing the times so dramatically.
Oh, wow.
Because it was a special technology advantage. And it's just that's the kind of stuff you can find where you're just like, this is nuts. This is crazy. But God is like so creative. He does it, as we said in the past, he does it without anything. He just speaks and there it is. We have to create from things. Like we go, oh, bugs got that. I'm going to produce.
Yeah, we don't create anything without something else first existing.
Even our beauty is therefore derivative. And so we get to creativity, and I think, again, this is an attribute that is obviously found in humanity. It's obviously found amongst us. We, as image of God, are the flecks of glory of God, and as I think that, I do agree with Augustine, as he says, we take an infinite amount of humanity to reflect back the infinite glory of God. And so we are just these flecks of these attributes and glory, but that means our creativity is all derivative from God's creativity. And that's okay. We've created some pretty cool stuff. In fact, I like how in this book, Culture Making by Andy Crouch.
Oh, yeah, that's a good book.
It's a really good book. He defines culture as humanity making something of what God's already made. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Making something of what God's already created. And then he goes even further. It's not just art. It's not just what you make of a family. It's how you make your home. It's what you make of your, all these different things. You're putting order to it. But I do think as we attach creativity with beauty, it does enter into the realm of art. Yeah. And I do think that's a subject that, while we've touched on it, I'd like to be more specific about it, because Christianity has given art away to the secular world.
Yeah, we think of it as less useful to us. The thing is, I think the biggest lie one of the devil has told people is that art isn't important to Christianity, when it's one of the most important things that people use to shape culture in our modern day.
Yeah, more people are influenced by art than they are by politics, hands down.
I mean, how many comedians on the late night really drive people's politics? If we're up until COVID and they have to do it from home, it's not as aesthetically appealing to watch a guy from home do it. But the comedian, oftentimes they even call him the modern preacher sometimes, because they are trying to reflect some aspect of life.
I feel like, and I'm not, honestly, I don't know the historical aspect of this, like how it occurred, but I feel like it's a rejection on the Christian's part of being able to put beauty in its rightful place. And so there's this sense where, this is definitely like a cultural situation that I grew up in, where there's like this rejection of beauty or enjoyment of things like that. And it's almost like, like Christians are, this is kind of crazy, but Christians are more of like, you're in a shack, you're homeless, you have nothing, right? And we forget that the temple was amazing, and God wanted them to put effort into making it to reveal his glory. So I don't know when it occurred, but I really do think it's a rejection of Christians' understanding.
Well, no, it's ignorance. There's historical ignorance. Like, we think of monks. What you're describing is a monk, right? But a monk is this guy, he's got stale walls.
Worldly stuff.
No worldly stuff. Yeah. Stale walls.
Yeah.
No, monks were incredibly artistic. If you look at a Bible that has gold inlay in it, these were craftsmen. They advanced crafts in their furniture designs. In fact, a long portion of a monk's day was furnishing a garden or some skill at a level and training other people to do it these people were not by any means or absent from art. That whole picture actually begins with the Reformation.
Yeah,
particularly with Zwingli. Now Zwingli was one of the reformers, and his thing was like, if it's not in the Bible, tear it away. He'd stripped all the accoutrements out of a church, and it just
part of the Catholic Church taking it to excess when it came to art also led some people to be concerned that people are actually engaging in art for the wrong reasons.
Right.
Idolatry became a concern for Protestant Reformation people, so any kind of statuary was removed from the sanctuary.
Because there's always areas, they're pitfalls. There's always ways that we can sin.
Yeah.
And so instead of like wrestling
fear.
through that and recognizing that like, oh, there's a pitfall here, and walking that line towards Christ.
Right.
I feel like we go in one extreme or the other.
Okay. But aren't we prudes? I mean, don't we have our pop art? I mean, we've got Air One, we've got we have our popular cultural arts. You've got creative people producing pop arts in in the Narnia movies and things like that. I don't want to. Some of those are truly artistic. You've been to Comic-Con and seen Christian artists there trying to propagate things and
but they're
the fine
very
line,
different. Though.
What's the fine line between what we would call to be like how I've always thought of as Christian cheese versus like a Rembrandt, which is like, oh my gosh, that's art. Or Yama, what's his name? Yamaguchi. He's in New York City. He works with Tim Keller. He's like one of the most incredible artists, but he's a Christian. He's Japanese. He just produces some of those incredible art pieces.
That I haven't heard. I have seen a lot of Christian artists. There's a few that I really like that work even in Hollywood industry that I met at Comic-Con. But they actually care about their craft. And so my problem with modern Christianity is we tend to mimic. That's one thing. We find out what's a trend and then we repeat that because people seem to like it. We'll duplicate radio songs that other people do perfectly. We don't generate and create art. We kind of recreate it. And then we take it from someone else who created it and then add it to our repertoire and use it for its utility, his utility on a Sunday morning. So that's frustrating to me. The other thing is, pop art has a tendency, even in the secular world, to be kind of whimsical and not necessarily thoughtful in the sense that you've studied. Some of my favorite artists, even in the pop world, have deep classical understanding of music.
They do.
You know what I mean? They play their own instruments. They write their own. Well, I don't want to go into a litmus of how many people I like. Like for instance. Well, okay, so I like Stevie Wonder because there's a guy who plays several different instruments. Even people who aren't necessarily, I don't like their lyrics, I can tell, like someone like Prince, he used to play every instrument. He used to play all of them well, and so like whether you like his lyrics or not, I can appreciate the fact that he knows how to play a guitar or he plays keys, piano, vocal, and does everything. And even though I don't value the morality of the music, I do appreciate the art value.
Okay, wait.
So I'd like to see that done.
I hit on that though. Like I feel like that is a huge issue in Christian culture, where we feel like we have to, if it's not fully Christian, we have to reject it.
No,
and that's something like my kids. Okay, so I like secular music a lot, but I also like Christian music. But I love secular music, and my kids growing up, they're raised in this Christian bubble, and they would get on me like, do these people know God? And I'm like, honey, they don't know God, but they have a skill, and I'm appreciating it. And that skill, when I recognize that somebody has amazing vocal quality or they're really great on the guitar, I'm worshiping God because He gave them that creativity. Now they don't necessarily worship God, but that doesn't mean that I can't. And so how do we change that in our Christian culture where we allow ourselves to recognize God in certain gifts, even if the person themselves that are creating it doesn't see it?
Yeah, well, again, to me, it has to do with how you engage that. Like, I don't understand how you can't study. Like, I love film, and I don't know how you can't study certain people that I don't like their film. I don't like what the message of their film is, but their craft is so amazing. I need to learn what that is, and that's the ability to consciously know what you can watch and what you can't watch, because one is going to tempt you, and the other one is going to draw you away. I can watch a movie for the most part, and if there's nothing in it, I might not agree with the worldview of the movie, which is pretty much every movie, to be honest with you. And I can say, like, oh wow, they put the camera there. Oh, wow, the dialogue is very sharp. Look at the editing technique. Look at the lighting technique. Look at the angle.
In fact, they don't, not only just one person doesn't do all that. An editor knows his craft as an editor. The producer knows his craft as a producer. The director knows his craft, and unfortunately, it's only the artists who get all the fame and glory.
So as a Christian, because you guys have it in your notes, but I wanted to hit on that in this conversation, is what is it that we're hitting on where somebody can create something that has beauty in it, right? It might not be fully beautiful in terms of like God-filled, it might be godless in some ways, but what is that allows somebody that doesn't acknowledge God to create something beautiful?
Okay, so
common grace.
There are three aspects to cultural creation over the years as I've thought through worldview and I kind of taught it. And the first aspect is theory. You have to know the theory. Like if you're going to create a good film or you're going to write a great book, you need to understand at least the theory of writing. You need to understand how to write a narrative, what a character plot is, and character arcs, and who's a foil, and what's a foil mean.
So there is
a theory out there that is important. In fact, artists often obsess first on the rules of the theory, but then what an artist does is his job is to go to the edge of the theory and see if he can push something so that it becomes so he can make it a little bit different. This is really the edge of the theory. It's almost like they're doing an experiment.
Yeah.
That's one way. The second part, though, is you have to have skill. I mean, if you're going to be a painter, what most people enjoy about an amazing painting like a Rembrandt is not just the stunning beauty of what he did with the paint, so it looks like literally light is shining on someone and that guy's moving. That's incredible enough. They get into like, do you see that brush stroke? Do you see how, because you can see how the paint moves when you get close to it. And you see what they did.
It's insane.
And they can tell you what form and that paint has lead in it. Like they're into the details of not just the theory, but the skill that it took there. Now, those two things are what you're seeing in any beautiful piece of art. But what we're getting wrong is that there's always an expression in art. Regardless of whether you're in the 90s and every like Eddie Vedder wants to sit around and tell you from Pearl Jam, like, I don't know what it means, you tell me. The dude was like a philosopher. He was actually, he had received his philosophy degree. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had a philosophy behind his music. But the point simply for him was, like, I'm not going to reveal my expression.
Yeah. He wants to draw you in.
Yeah. And so there's this idea of expression. What I have found is that there are three different critiques in Christian art that makes it cheesy.
That wasn't my question.
But first, and I think this answers your question on, the first answer is that non-Christians, because they worship,
they're made in the image of God. So.
They're made in the image of God, but because they worship something in particular, they will dedicate themselves. And often some will dedicate themselves because they love the craft in and of itself. So they will learn all the theories and get all the skills down. And they can produce something incredible. But their expression of what they're producing in that incredibleness is gross or broken, or we don't agree with it. Now, so they can produce beauty. That's a common grace. The theories are there. The skills can be trained. We're made in the image of God.
It still reflects God's beauty.
They're taking something God gave them, and even though part of it might be profane, the other part that you see is the part that you see is good, is glorifying to God because it's His elements. He gives us those abilities, and He gives them out. The idea in the Scripture seems to see He gives them out so that in hopes that you will draw you closer to God. Mm-hmm. So when someone's making music and they say, I don't know, just kind of this arrangement just almost came to me. There's almost like a spiritual experience they talk about.
Muses.
Well, they are talking about that experience that's drawing you to the other world or to another person that's not in this world. And most artists talk as if they're in some kind of weird space, and I think a part of that is it's trying to show you this isn't the only world. There's something beyond this world. There's themes, there's truths, there's something you're seeing about human nature. Even if you're clearly identifying sinful human nature accurately, you're seeing it in its real light, and you're able to transcribe it through an art form. That's difficult to do.
There's order to things. And so to get back to the Christian cheese side, for me, what's gone on is one of three things. So the easiest aim is to really pick on. You can see it better in the Christian music industry. Like when we were younger, and I would listen to secular music and I would listen to Christian music, and there was a clear distinction in the superiority of these people's skill and understanding of music. Like there was these people and mixing. Like there was a clear difference in the mixing and the form of how you put a CD together, all that, or just a tape cassette, whatever. and what was interesting is that the Christian artists were skilled, but they weren't as skilled as the secular artist. And now you'll see that that's changed. Like Christian artists are just as skilled. Because of the time that's gone on, we've trained, they've learned, they've skilled up in that sense. But then there's the theory, and some of these guys were classically trained Juilliard, kind of people, and they had gone to USC for music. They knew their theory super well, and they were able to implement it into their music. And you saw that as kind of awkward. And I think what's gone on with Christian music now is that, well, we may be good with the skills and we're even good at, sound design, and we're good at our theories and thinking through things, not great at them because we still like very simplistic music as Christians, as American Christians, I'll put it that way. Our expression is not totally a Christian biblical worldview anymore. It's a hodgepodge of expressions where I found I'll listen to some lyrics and I'm just like,
this is not the Christian.
This is not the Christian worldview. This is something else. Now it's a beautiful song and it's supposed to be Christian, but I mean the same thing with the movies, right? They got better at their skills, but they didn't learn their theory. And then even when you start looking at what's their point, you're like, this isn't exactly a Christian message. It's
not a sophisticated Christian worldview.
No, it's not. It's not driving you to the depth of what actually the scriptures is pulling out.
Or doesn't mimic real life. Like real life, while I watch a Christian movie, what I often is frustrated is the lack of sophistication by which someone has motivated to do something.
Like the evil person especially, because we're afraid of representing evil people as evil.
Or just or even if they're not completely evil, that they're part. Like for instance, I watched a movie where the person's whole main problem is that he's quote unquote selfish. Well, why is he selfish? Was he abused as a child? Usually, people don't go, you know what? Today I'll be selfish
because he's a sinner.
Yeah, and so so they feel like the identification of your sin is somehow going to just change people. And when you start looking at how God complexly created us, that oftentimes people have to justify their bad behavior by making it seem good to them. And so that's why when you, as an actor will say, I got to find the reason why this guy did this horrible thing, but convinced himself that was the right thing to do. That's what an actor's looking to do. And that's because that's how we think most likely as humans. We don't.
Yeah. So the other problem is categorically we get ourselves wrong. Like a lot of Christian movies turn them into just evangelistic projects.
Yeah, they're just cardboard cutouts of people to get to the verse you want at the end of the story. They lack sophistication.
As you've talked about with some people that you've known, that it's just got to be a replay of the biblical story
without any changes.
No changes, which is what I like about The Chosen.
Yeah.
The Chosen has kind of stepped back and asked those questions of going like, well, why?
What was Peter's marriage like? That's not in the Bible.
Yeah, why is Matthew a tax collector? What brought him there?
Yeah.
Did he have friends? Was he married? What would make him be somebody who's so calculated like this? And I just love that there's a creative thoughtfulness about it.
Yeah.
So
you just said The Chosen.
Yeah.
We mentioned some many things, and I'm like, I wonder if.
Go ahead.
If people have seen The Chosen.
Yeah, it's just I don't even know. It's like a mini series on.
It's on YouTube right now, the first season, and it takes place in the biblical times.
You can there's actually the Chosen app. You can get it and watch all of them there. They're working on the second season.
Yeah, and it's fun. It's crowdfunded, I think, as well. Mm-hmm. And they do have pretty good craft as far as movie making is concerned.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, they do. And so it was very impressive for me. Like it was exciting. It was what was powerful about it to me was. The art came through.
Yeah.
Like, I was motivated by the character. I was intrigued and looking forward to watching the next one. I mean, that's something that often I haven't found with there have been Christian video games that, to be quite honest, were just like
Christian board games.
But people don't realize that Myst was a Christian.
Oh.
Were Christians behind that, and it was a very popular game. But
I feel like there's this. I feel like where Christians went wrong in terms of art or in beauty aesthetics, whatever, is they're missing the point in what they're portraying. So they, instead of portraying the depth of the gospel, the beauty of who God is, it's just slapping on this like Christian veneer, right? without any of the content, without any of the actual meaning. Do you know what I mean? Because like you don't have to see somebody praying, and you don't have to. Everything doesn't have to be overt for it to have a Christian worldview portrayed.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I think when I watch Christian art, what I get is someone who's very aware of the Christian biblical message more than they are about how humans interact. I actually think it's almost the opposite in the sense that they understand Scripture from this interesting point of view, but not from how someone lives it out on their daily life.
From a devotional point of view, not from a...
It feels like I'm watching a track. It's not really sophisticated to the individual problem or the human condition.
And we're not saying we're superior about these things. Like, producing art
it's really hard.
Hard.
Yeah, human beings are hard to capture. And so that they end up becoming something, I think, of a statement. And this is why we don't like certain bad films. We don't know why we don't like them, but we're like, oh, that villain wasn't really that strong. It just seems too easy for the hero.
Or it was too accurate.
Or we're finding, I think, not only are Christians finding this out, in our current political culture, without getting too far into things, you're starting to see people preach more in modern art, and people are being turned off to being preached to
like
in
the
the
modern
middle.
Star Wars.
Yeah,
all sermons. They're not secular sermons.
They used to. Like, the whole point of Star Wars, when it was originally made, Lucas was trying to make Apocalypse Now and make an anti-war film, believe it or not. And he ended up making Star Wars. And I don't know if you found the message in there, but for him, he got everybody to buy into that vision of, wow, war is not always pleasant. You know, there are spiritual aspects to war, and there are casualties, and people die. And you could have done a war film, but he chose to do Star Wars to reflect on how war affects us and how we like it and don't like it. Now, what do you think about it? That's interesting. But now you just say, like, you have to like this character because of what it represents. That's why people go, oh, you don't like Christian films because you don't like Christianity. No, I love Christianity. What I don't like is when it's portrayed like humans don't live it. And that's the frustration is Star Wars had a mythos and people acted, and then now you're just going to stop and then, hey, here's a message for you. Look at this. Isn't that represent something?
It's like old product placement in the 80s movies where suddenly a guy's holding the Pepsi can, you're like, and it's perfectly pointed at the screen. Yeah. And it's almost like, well, this person is now your product placement for your
stop the story. We want to sell you something.
Idea. And I feel like that's been kind of the move Christianity fell into after really our Christian energy was attempted to be reborn through Billy Graham and the Evangelical Revolution in the 1950s and 60s. And in the 70s with the Jesus movement, he came more of that adoption stuff. And again, if you really want a good history of how that worked out, Andy Crouch works through in his Cinder section all about the history of Christians and culture. I mean, the heyday of Christian culture was really the Renaissance time period in the north of Europe. Is kind of where the Enlightenment was in the south. The Reformation was in the north, but it was all of this Renaissance of beauty, and it kind of has a very strong passion all the way through to the 1800s until roughly the debates of science versus
late 1800s,
like the late 1800s,
Darwinism.
Darwinism, and the Civil War decimates American spirit. And then the big burst of energy at the end of the 1800s towards lots of money and stuff. Kind of the fine arts actually were there, but they fall apart. I think it was Ben Shapiro or somebody was telling me that more people would listen to class. No, like he was saying it on the thing. He was explaining that, like in the 1950s, more people were involved in listening and going to classical music. And things
that's
like
a part of the
They
culture.
were a part of the greater arts when they got back, and then the 60s rolled through and just the pop arts became the most important thing.
We went from a culture that everyone had to enjoy aesthetically, your parents and kids would be like, oh, classical music, to everything being focused more on kids. Really, the shift became that who are the major pop cultural icons were often not what your parents listened to, but what the kids listen to. And it just keeps getting progressively younger as we go on. So the cultural shift
be watching Teletubbies
so we're all
at
concerned
church?
about what a 13-year-old kid says on Twitter, with his art or whatever, than we are about anything else. And so it's just like we value that culture that's younger and younger and younger. So I think it's interesting how that actually came about.
It's interesting.
So as we work on, I think my big encouragement is I would like to see more Christians involved in art. I'd like to see more Christians writing and attempting to, but first get educated. Go learn theories, practice your skills.
Well, it doesn't have to be art per se. I think that, so for me, I would take away from this conversation of just as a Christian.
Just aesthetic appreciation.
Yes, aesthetic appreciation
put your house together.
to recognize that like there's beauty all around us, and it points to God, to the amazing God that we serve, and it calls us to worship Him more. And so, honestly, it's kind of a freeing conversation of like we get to enjoy this beautiful creation that He made, and it actually causes us to worship Him more. It actually engenders us to Him, endears us to Him more. The more that we delight in things like simple things, like how you cook your meat, or how you make your meals, or how you put your house together, how you take care of, plants and stuff like that, or animals. Or there's so many things that we get to enjoy and find beauty in. And they're not in themselves, things that
no, it's the biggest sin, really, I think, too, that was convinced by churches that you're not allowed to enjoy anything.
Yeah.
That God created things, and in their proper place, they are mightily enjoyable. That's how they were designed. So they're pleasing and aesthetic and glorifying to God.
That was, the enemy foisted that lie on the church, because that was never what the church was. They always talk about the Puritans being these people of just dark, black and white clothing and pilgrims. They had massive aesthetic loves. They enjoyed things deeply. They were not like prudes by any stretch of the imagination.
I would say the 80s and 90s have done more for making art go backwards. When we come out, and I have no problem with us identifying how the world doesn't do art well, but we never gave a substitute. We told me, when I was a kid, I got a book about how every band was bad. Not the fact that this parts of the music is good and this message is bad and here's what God would have us think about. Being sophisticated.
Really thinking through it.
Thinking through it. What I got is how not to do anything, including not listen to good music or have any alternatives. So I either listen to bad, sinful music or none at all. That was really the frustrating thing, and it set us back because now we're fearful and we're not engaging in beauty.
And what Andy Crouch says is that what happened is that now our culture shifted in the 2000s.
Gave into it.
Well, no, in the 2000s we went into cultural replication.
Yeah.
So we started, if you wanted that band, you liked that band, you liked a Pearl Jam, well, we've got a...
Christian Pearl Jam.
We got Christian Pearl Jam. It's, Pearls Before Swine or something. and so there was this...
Probably a band name.
Yeah, and so you had this adjustment of copying, but what happened was, he points this out, somewhere in the mid-2010s, we stopped even consuming the copies, and we just went back to the originals. Now that we are all comfortable with the sound of music and this kind of thing, and now actually we have now it's shaping Christian thinking away from the gospel.
Well,
because we're not being sophisticated.
Powerful.
It is so
because
powerful.
Like I said, it's the biggest lie.
The way that we think and the way that we live.
It gets past your brain and gets straight to your soul. And I think the problem I have is really either if you're too much of a person that likes to be in their brain, you don't ever enjoy anything. You just you're critical. But also there are other people who they never think about anything. They just feel everything.
They experience.
Yeah. And so that both of those are out of the character which God designed us to be beautiful. In order to really properly enjoy beauty, you have to think about it and let go and experience it at some point. If you find out it's good. And then I think that's okay. And if you don't do that, if you're always like, I can't enjoy anything in life, then you aren't really experiencing the beauty of what God's created us to.
And it should remind us to not, the consumer mindset.
Watch what
is
you
not
consume.
The best mindset when it comes to.
I'm all for caution, and I always say this, even with therapy. You can identify problems all day long in a therapy session with someone who's really hurting, but if you don't give them a godly solution to their pain, all you're doing is making their life worse. So this is what I say: as much as we should be critics of music or critics of our church on Sunday morning, I would rather hear what you would want to see because you thought it through. Here's what I would love to see, as opposed to here's what I don't like what I see. Because that's sophisticated. I can respect someone going, wow, why did you have that person do that? And I'm like, but if I were up there, I would do this. Oh, great. Enjoy the arts.
But also to take seriously that there's skill involved in all these things. That even God
people are
blessed,
trying to perfect their skills at the very least.
And so practicing and placing ourselves in those things.
I do feel like, I feel like we're coming to an end, but I don't feel like we really hit on how a Christian should be thinking about physical beauty. I feel like that is a huge aspect within the church. I don't know. Did you guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we kind of skipped over that.
Yeah, one of the things that comes up a lot when we talk about beauty is not just that we're talking about the arts, but kind of going back all the way to beauty, is how does a person with their eye view aesthetic beauty, because that does become a problem for people, and that's why I'm glad you're here, because men struggle with beauty differently than women do. There's a different way that I think sometimes that we see beauty, and I think that even like I said earlier, we don't go around saying, well, that man is a beautiful guy, but
we have terms.
We do have terms: attractive, charming, those kinds of things. And I guess the question becomes, you either one extreme where people go, well, I never see external beauty. It doesn't exist. I just look at your heart. And then you have the other extreme where that's all I care about is the external beauty, the satisfaction I get from looking at somebody.
Or,
and those are the two extremes I see a lot of times.
There's another thing that I see occurring is that there's a sense of like, well, then everything's beautiful. So like then they're...
Yeah. So nothing is profane.
It means nothing, everyone's beautiful.
So again, I think that there's two aspects that I would worry about. One is that you become enamored with external beauty so that you end up in vanity, which is enamored by your own external beauty. You can obsess with it. You can go into, suddenly now you're
trying to improve on it
paying
constantly.
all kinds of money to cosmetically turn yourself into something you think is beautiful. I mean, you end up in psychological dangers from eating disorders to you name it. The other one is to just shut down and, like you said, like everything's beautiful. Have no discernment on what is actually beautiful, and therefore be offended if you're like literally not taking care of yourself at all, and
someone doesn't find you attractive.
Yeah, and now you're like, why does nobody find me attractive? It's like, whoa. There is, while the Bible tells us to be careful. That it's about the moral and internal beauty of what you present. Those two things will come together. I mean, if you're bearing the fruit of the Spirit, you're going to bear self-control. I mean, so having control over your body, understanding how you present yourself, like some people are, some people are going to be more skilled in that than other people. Let's just be honest. I can try, and it just hasn't worked all the time for me. So it's like, I've
but
grown.
You're very disciplined with your mind.
Yes.
But not with your body.
You saying I have a beautiful mind? No, just kidding.
I do. That's
Like
actually one of my favorite things about you.
Well,
your mind.
Part of it is that, we often look at the world and say that's bad, but we also do Christian versions of things. So most studies say that in the world, men are attracted to physical beauty more than anything, and women are attracted to power or strength more than anything. These are just what studies say. So in the world, it might be obvious as a Christian to go, oh yeah, well definitely that person's a trophy wife, and then that person's married to that person because they're rich. But we have Christian versions of this too, where that person's like, oh, I like that person because they have it all together and they're really strong, and you want to be around them because of what they do for you. And then we often say like, we can't look. I don't look at beauty. I only look at their heart, and that could be a problem. Or you think that person's spiritual just because they're charming. I've had a lot of preachers get up there, be very attractive, very charming, very funny, and say nothing of substance or anything closely resembling. Everybody's like, wow, I feel so good. It's just that whole charm from the top.
So, like, I don't want to sit here and make the opposite claim either, though. That's like, oh, well, you're not into makeup. So, there was a pastor who once said something I find extremely offensive. It was like, he told the women in the congregation, well, sometimes if the bar needs painting, and you're just like...
Oh, and... Like, as a woman, I've struggled with this, like, my whole life. Just the perception of women's beauty and their value being connected to that. It is impossible to, like, dissect those two things in our culture.
What do you mean?
I feel like it's like we're duplicitous in our words towards women. So we say that what really matters is your character and you're innately valuable, and yet we don't treat women like that. So, even in the church. So, in the church... Just like in the secular world, women that are more beautiful get treated better. And I mean, countless stories of friends who have had, weight problems and things, and then they lose weight, and then they get treated better all of a sudden. Like, it's it's a problem I would say just as badly in the secular world as it is in the Christian world. There's not a distinction. And then also, like, one of the things that really impacted me when you were a youth pastor, and we separated the girls and the guys, and we talked about modesty and purity and all that. Mm-hmm. And one of the girls, I love that she said that. She's like, she's like, I was all for this modesty, and and she kind of took modesty to be something where you don't like put effort into the way you look. But she's like, but when I'm with my boyfriend, he doesn't look at the plain girls. he doesn't look at the modest girls. He's looking at all the girls that have, those are the girls that catch his eye, and those are the girls that he gives attention to. Obviously, she shouldn't have been with this guy, but I loved that. I liked what she said, because she's expressing the experience of every woman, that ultimately we know who gets the attention. And so then there's that battle inside of your soul of like, are we going to fight for that attention, or are we going to be satisfied in ourselves and not need to like do something to get that attention or to gain that attention or encourage it? Sometimes it's not that you're doing anything, but you're just encouraging it.
Right. So two sides on that. One is Jesus obviously teaches and tells people that just because it's attractive doesn't mean you should desire to consume it.
It's not yours.
It's not yours to. And so this is something that's like a man should be able to confess that a woman is beautiful without feeling like, well, I want to have sex with that person. Mm-hmm. That's what Jesus is trying. Jesus viewed women as beautiful, but it didn't go through his mind to go, and therefore I'm going to consume them. So there is
treat them like an object.
So there is a clear self-control aspect to observing beauty that doesn't turn into a bastardizing or objectifying the person or beauty, and so that's the beholder's problem. I think the opposite is the vanity issue, where a woman gains, as you said, kind of an energy.
It's addictive, I think. And for most women, I believe that men's attention is addictive, but it's kind of one of those things where you only want the attention from the people that you like.
Yeah, you don't
and
want
then the ones
that
that give you
everybody.
attention that you don't like, it is just so insulting and ridiculous. And like, how dare you talk to me like that? But when a man that you're attracted to treats you like that, it's welcomed.
So I would say that when it comes to physical beauty, I think that it needs to be a considered reflection of the as a Christian, a considered reflection of your internal state, and in the sense of like, as you're growing in internal beauty, in the sense of your godliness, I think it begins to reflect in your externals. I think it begins. You get challenged about is something like, I'll just give you a simple one. Jesus says, or Paul says, nothing should be controlling me, right? So this is a powerful statement, except for Christ, right? So, well, what shouldn't be controlling me over here is this idea like, well, I shouldn't care about myself. Well, no. Self-control says I should care about myself, but I can't fall into vanity. And so it leans you back into almost a right kind of level. Like, you may not like be ripped or whatever, but as a man, but you're caring for yourself. It puts it in the right category.
That laziness in us that in every other area we want to
Virtue.
Go to one extreme or the other instead of like kind of walking that line where we're trying to not be lazy with our bodies, but also not falling into vanity. Like, you know what I mean? Kind of walking.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing, because, lost a lot of weight, and having to kind of go through all these mental issues, the difficulty becomes anytime you try to self-improve, who am I doing this for? And I think when it comes to God granting some people beauty or some people the ability to do something, God wants you to do something with it. When I think of someone like Esther, her beauty was used to save a group of people. You have to understand, sometimes our beauty, the things that God given us, it might be beauty for some, it might be charisma, it might be intelligence, whatever's drawing people to you, if you think of it as a gift that God wants to cultivate to bring people closer to Him and to draw you closer to God, then hopefully the person you attract wants to get closer to you because you are close to God and that you're growing together in that fashion. But if you want to just be desired, then that's a different motivation that I think is going to lead you to feel unsatisfied, because even the most desired people, like rock stars and stuff, commit suicide and stuff.
Yeah.
They're never satisfied.
Yeah, let me take it to another step, because let me rephrase kind of what I was meaning.
Yeah.
Is that I think of it in these terms. There are situations in which I feel like there are churches out there that produce the gospel in such a beautiful manner, but they wrap it in a really nasty looking exterior. Their church is ugly. They don't care about beauty. They don't want the music stinks, whatever. And then you flip it around. You have some churches that are incredible. Like the box is amazing. It's got but inside it, they're not giving you anything. It's just like a little piece of coal or something. I believe that there is a sense of integrity that needs to happen with the kind of soulish person that you are with your external presentation. And what I mean by that is that you don't want to lie to someone. If you're trying to attract someone and you're not representing the core of who you truly are in a way, and we do this, right? Nerds dress in a different way than jocks dress. You know, there's an eternal portion of who you are that will come through your dress. And all I'm saying is that there's a skill to that, there's a theory to that, there's an expression of that this is what even yourself. I'm not saying we're an art piece I'm not gonna get
you're a creation though.
Yeah, I'm not gonna get into tattoos and all that stuff like your body's a canvas. I'm not going there. But my point is that there is an intentionality that we should have as Christians in the expression of who we are. I mean, if God was so concerned with the Israelites that they shouldn't dress in, dual mixed clothing, and he had an interest in the way they dressed. He had an interest in how the priest presented himself. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the closer you got to the holy place, the more beautiful the clothing became, and the more ornate it became. Right. And so there's a reality of your self-expression should be an identification, and I mean self-expression not as like, hey, check me out on Facebook, I'm gonna shout all this stuff. I mean, like, the way you present yourself to people should be a representation of your spiritual being. And I think originally that is what the concepts of like manners and decorum in a society was about. That's why it began to structure itself in certain ways. I mean, my wife bought me years ago a book on manners, and I was like laughing at it. But what struck me was all the manners in this book were based off...
But you read it.
I did read it. And all the manners were based off of one thought. Whether it affected me or not is different. The thought was, do unto others as you would have them do to you. And all manners were based on that. And suddenly it shapes the way that you think, okay, how would I want someone to come and enjoy my table when I'm eating with them? Now, it's not going to look the same in every culture. Mm-mm. But suddenly you're like, well, how would I want if somebody had to look at me today...
Okay, so that's what I did with our boys, because we have 3 boys, and they've all gone through phases where they don't want to care for themselves. And one of the things
some boys do.
I said, look, this isn't for you right now. This is for everybody that has to look at you or smell you or sit near you. Like, you're doing it for other people, for the love of others. And then one of our sons was like, but I don't love anybody. So, like, why do I have to do this?
He doesn't love me.
He does love people now. He's grown out of it.
But that to me is the connection. I think that is
that's the opposite of what the world says.
Right. I think that's the biblical assertion. You shouldn't. I mean, that's why I'm against plastic surgery. I believe it's a presentation of a lie. And I know some people who've watched this have had it. It's a sticky issue.
Don't you think that? Okay, so you're against personally plastic surgery, and I don't think that everybody that's had plastic surgery is in sin. No. I'm not. I do think that. The core of it.
You do have to ask the question why.
Pointing you in the wrong direction. It's for women especially. Like it is oftentimes giving into the objectification of women. It's literally like lending itself to say, yes, I am an object that I need to like look good. I need to maintain some specific look. Whether it's to stay young or...
And I think there's something actually spiritual behind that. And an insecurity, in something
I've never seen plastic surgery help somebody. Like, unless...
You're not other than medical.
Clarifying, reconstructive surgery is completely different. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about cosmetic surgery for the sake of... Yeah.
I've never seen it give somebody more confidence.
It's created more insecurity.
Yeah, usually, because you're feeding your flesh in some ways, right? So you're... lending itself to
it just simply creates this question. Do you like me? Would you have liked me if I hadn't done this? Would you have been as attracted to me if I hadn't done and again, I'm going to back off. Reconstructive is different, like totally. But that is different from cosmetic, which is in my mind would be an unnecessary enhancement of the body for the sake of an attempt to
look more attractive.
Yeah, bring more attraction to yourself, or attractiveness to yourself, and attraction from whoever it is you're seeking attraction from. So, I think it walks on the line of deception.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't really thought a lot. I've talked to people about it, and I haven't come to a position on it. For me, I haven't come to a position. I've seen people do it for really stupid reasons and others for self-esteem issues. The question for me from a therapy standpoint is, I often think this has to do with body issues, body dysmorphia, or some distortion in the way that you view yourself that's inappropriate before the Lord first. And I would rather fix that problem than the external one, because oftentimes that's not going to fix it. Well, so if you are feeling low in self-esteem and you haven't done anything and you think that's going to fix your problem, and you haven't tried to, go through the process of figuring out, where do you get your value from? What are you about? Who do you get benefit from? Who are your friends? Who, what are their, that kind of a thing, and making sure you have the appropriate cultural support. After going through maybe all of those steps, then perhaps, but I think that's usually the first thing people want to do. They want to go fix this external problem, and it doesn't typically fix the internal one, or it might give you just a new set of problems. You know what I mean? And so I think you have to ask those questions spiritually first. That would probably be more healthy.
And that's why, as a Christian, I would say it's an alignment with Christ that must come first before those actions. Because how you present yourself needs to be in alignment with truth. Because all of us have weird feelings about ourselves in the interior that we think we should be one thing or another, and those aren't virtuous to play upon. I mean, they can cause all kinds of issues. In fact, they often are the opposite, and we don't want to just baptize, God's blessing because He made us that way. That's not what I'm saying.
Well, the biggest, again, going back to beauty and the lie, is that if God finds you beautiful because He created you, but that doesn't mean everything about you is beautiful and doesn't have a sin nature. In other words,
I find your sin beautiful.
He doesn't.
He finds it repulsive.
He's
angry at it. And he's going to judge it and condemn it. And that's why hell is not full of beautiful people. It's going to be full of ugly, twisted things.
I think of it, if you want a physical manifestation of what it look like. If someone had a bulbous cancerous tumor on the outside of their head, and you just said, "No, that's beautiful the way it is. I'm not going to treat it." That's how God looks at sin. So there's a lot of things where people say, "I just got to accept me for me," and I think that is the most unloving thing you can ask people to do for you, because what you actually are asking them to do is objectify you.
I think of the Elephant Man, right? Yeah. A man who was, gawked upon for his elephantitis and all the things that were wrong with him, and yet he was what he was famous for was not because he looked that way, but because of his Christian testimony and how powerful it was in the face of the things that he faced. Yeah. He is a better version of the pretend Augie from Wonder. Wonder's a fake story. This man who was a real story, who had true beauty, though he had a physical malformation that was not his fault. And that wonder is grabbing at that thought. It's not that everything is beautiful. It's no, this was more beautiful than the exterior. And when we just focus on the exterior, we miss out on so much. And I think that's why I like that book, Wonder. And I would love kids who read Wonder to go discover the Elephant Man and go learn his story. It is so much richer because it's real. It was a true story. So again, we could wax eloquent on beauty for another 40 hours.
The only thing I want to say is there are people that suffer from self-esteem issues. And I know you're out there, and whatever you think we're saying, I will say this, as someone who understands some of those issues, that when God loves you, it does help your self-esteem to a tremendous value. When you understand that Christ died for you and values you and wants you to live in eternity, and most of the problems that we concern ourselves with are people who aren't paying attention to God anyway, then once you have that settled right, that's the beginning of any kind of healing of self-esteem issues. And so I would say, it really does matter that God loves you more than any other person, because He's going to love you perfectly. Once you have that, then it's easier to find the person God might send your way to love. But you always have people around you that love you and care for you as well.
So not just that He loves you, I mean that He would die for you.
Yeah.
That's how much He loves you.
He desires to be in relationship with His creation, and He wants to do something beautiful with you and as a part of that creation when we join His story.
And like I said, we're separated from beauty, but that is the reconnection to beauty, the true beauty. And then that true beauty is setting forth as a beautiful author a beautiful story, not without its ugliness, because it's all bound in there and stuff, but to be on His story then is where you find that beauty, that esteem, that purpose, that life. And so again, all of these things, I believe, like I say amen, they get healed in the connection of the true, holy, beautiful, righteous, just God who has loved us and is patient with us and gracious with us. I mean, it is so deep. We could produce such great art.
Hopefully.
Anyway.
We probably should close here.
Yeah. Thank you guys for joining us. And Steve, will you close in prayer?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you for creating something that makes us look up, Lord God, that looks to a day where all of the pain and suffering and the way we falsely judge what is beautiful will be done away with, and we'll look at the pure beauty of how much you love us and how much you've drawn us and why you even created all the things that you did. And I thank you for an eternity of being able to look forward to those things. I just pray for anyone out there who is struggling with beauty, struggling with their self-worth, or struggling with how to figure out how to love you more, or challenged to really figure out what is beautiful, Lord, and what needs to be in their life that they need to cultivate. I pray that they do that, Lord, and that you be with them, Lord. And we thank you for this opportunity in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.